Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to welcome to the Lech Kaczyński National School of Public Administration the distinguished guest, Mr. Oliver Farhali, Commissioner of European Union responsible for enlargement and neighborhood. Mr. Commissioner, your visit to the Lech Kaczyński National School is important for our students who are preparing to take up in the future important tasks in public administration, but also because our school is engaged in neighborhood policy. For 10 years, we are organizing the Eastern Partnership Public Academy of Public Administration for officials from Eastern Partnership countries. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, today's lecture is being given in hybrid form with only a few students present in the auditorium. I warmly welcome everyone who is following the broadcast online. Today's meeting provides, I hope, an excellent opportunity to reflect on important questions. Has the pandemic COVID-19 affected the European neighborhood relations? What is the current enlargement policy of the European Union? Mr. Commissioner, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Director Federcik. It is a real pleasure and a great honor to be with you here today. Upon my arrival, I was informed that since the establishment of this institution in 1990, the Lech Kaczyński National School of Public Administration has already formed quite a number of generations of committed, independent and professional civil servants who have gone on to serve their country proudly as civil servants in the central and local administrations, but also they took up diplomatic posts representing Poland outside the country at international organizations and in very important capitals of the world. If we look at the last 20 years since the establishment of this prestigious school, Europe has gone through a long period of transition, interrupted by some serious crises. Today, when we are in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, bundled with a serious climate of distrust, your personal dedication to your national community is very much respected and recognized. The mission statement of this school and the core principles of civil services, supplemented by a living testimony of your namesake, late President, His Excellency Lech Kaczyński, gives you a good foundation on how to move on and be of true value to this nation and its society and to Europe. However, let me add one more thing to this list at the homeland of Pope Saint Paul II, John Paul II. Believe that the only way how you will succeed on this road of public service if you have faith and spiritual resilience. Today, let me take the opportunity to present you the work of this European Commission, and I will focus my speech on two major points. one on the engagement with our neighborhood and enlargement partners, and second, recent policy developments. This work and engagement was heavily remarked and marked by the COVID-19 pandemic, but the Commission stood by the partners from the beginning of the outbreak. We have mobilized substantial packages, total around 4.5 billion euros, to respond to the immediate health emergencies, to support the health systems and help partner countries to face the social and economic impact of the pandemic. Funding is being earmarked to support access, for example, for our partners to COVID vaccines procured by the EU member states. This is also one of the key topics of my visit here in Warsaw. Because just last week, we were able to announce the delivery of a substantial amount of vaccines, 651,000 doses of Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines to the Western Balkans to ensure the vaccination of frontline medical workers and some of the most vulnerable groups. This is a clear expression of European solidarity, and I'm sure we will see more of such examples in the future. Now, let's turn to the regions of my portfolio, the regions surrounding Europe. The European neighborhood policy remains the political framework of engagement with our eastern and southern partners. It entails 4 broad priorities. First is good governance, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Second, economic development and stabilization. Third is security. And lastly, migration and mobility. We are implementing these 4 priorities in line with the principles of differentiation, shared ownership, and incentive-based approach through our policy engagement, political dialogue, and financial support. In terms of its financial assistance, the Commission has proposed a comprehensive instrument supporting partnerships worldwide, namely the Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument, also known as NDICI, or the latest name of it is Global Europe. It is expected to enter into force this June, and the envelope of the whole instrument is roughly 80 billion euros, 79.4 billion euros, out of which 19.3 billion euros will be earmarked for our neighborhoods. Now, let's start with the Eastern Partnership countries. As I would imagine, this poses most interest in this capital. In the Eastern neighborhood, the 2020 deliverables for 2020, which was set back in 2017, is the reform agenda that is coming to the end. In March last year, we have put forward, therefore, a proposal to shape our relations beyond 2020. Our proposal sets 5 long-term objectives under the overarching framework of resilience. Because if you look at the region, vulnerabilities are the key challenges, vulnerabilities that are capable of destabilizing the security, the society, and the economy of these countries, vulnerabilities that we should help to overcome. So, what are the objectives? First is economy with connectivity. The second and the third, the twin green and digital transition. The fourth is accountable institutions, rule of law, and security. And the fifth is the resilient, fair, and inclusive societies. In line with these objectives and in close cooperation with all stakeholders, we're working on a solid reform agenda for our partnership. It will focus on 2 pillars. First, economic recovery, supported by economic and investment plans, tailor-made for the needs of these countries. Second, which is underpinned and sustained by reforms. We expect that this new agenda will be endorsed at the Eastern Partnership Summit, which is due next autumn. In the context of the bilateral relations with the partner countries, we recognize the ambitions of Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine to deepen their relations with the EU. The EU is ready to explore closer cooperation with these three, but first and foremost, it is important and paramount that these countries make full use and full implementation of their deep and comprehensive free trade areas, or also known as DCFTAs, because they have still some potential to be fully realized. If you look at these agreements, what you find is that these agreements provide the possibility for these countries to take over as much as 70% of all the EU legislation. So there is ample opportunity to accelerate their integration with us, but this still needs to be used. This is why the EU is focusing strongly on the implementation of these agreements with these three countries. Now let me go country by country. And I cannot tell you that we have been bored or we have been lacking action and development in the region. Most of it were not that pleasant. Concerning Armenia, we are looking on the implementation of the comprehensive and enhanced partnership. And of course, we are looking into providing possibilities for humanitarian aid when it comes to the post-conflict handling of the situation in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. With Azerbaijan, negotiations have continued for a new bilateral agreement. Very important progress is still needed to conclude the negotiations, notably under the trade part of the draft agreement. We also continue to support both partners in the aftermath of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. In Belarus, the conduct of the aftermath of the presidential elections of last year have put at risk progress that had been made previously, and the negotiations for new partnership priorities have been put on hold. Let me assure you that we stand by the people of Belarus in the face of these continued aggressions from the regime. In reaction to the fraudulent presidential elections and the brutal response by the regime that followed, we have mobilized 3.7 million euros in emergency assistance for the victims of oppression and independent media. And as a follow-up package, we have also mobilized another 24 million euros last December to benefit directly the Belarusian people, in particular the civil society, youth and medium-sized enterprises, and to improve the health capacities as the country is facing also a COVID crisis. Further support to facilitate SMEs access to finance worth of 6 million euros is on its way. Now let's turn to the southern neighborhood. The situation in the southern neighborhood remains very challenging and very diverse. Developments in the region have varied from one country to the next. On the one hand, crises continued in Syria and Libya, although conflict intensity decreased. The prospects for conflict settlement between Israel and Palestine remain weak, despite a series of encouraging normalization agreements between Israel and some Arab countries. The dramatic socio-economic situation in Lebanon has been aggravated by the Beirut port blast in August last year and has plunged an even bigger part of the population into poverty. On the other hand, the political situation in a number of countries remains stable, and a number of new cooperation initiatives, in particular with Morocco, Green Partnership, Security Cooperation, to name a few, have been developed. In general, the economic situation remains highly worrying in most partner countries. The issue of migration and mobility remains high on the political agenda between the EU and the southern neighborhood. In November last year, we have marked the 25th anniversary of the Barcelona process, which launched the Euro-Mediterranean partnership with our southern partners back in 1995. We took it as an opportunity to announce the renewal of the EU-Southern Neighborhood relations. As a follow-up, in February of this year, we have put forward a new agenda for the Mediterranean with an accompanying 7 billion euros for the first half of the next MFF, together with an economic and investment plan, and we are mobilizing another 30 billion euros in private and public investments in the region for the next decade. The EU and our partners in the region, we share both challenges and opportunities. We propose a positive narrative which acknowledges challenges, including terrorism and climate change, global phenomena of migration, and the challenge of illegal migration. And we want to take advantage of opportunities like the Green Deal or the digital transition. The economic and investment plan for the southern neighbors aims at ensuring an improved quality of life for the people in the region, and that the economic recovery is accompanied by the European Union, which is so much in need given the very strong impact the COVID crisis had on these regions. The plan includes 12 flagship initiatives to strengthen the resilience, build prosperity, increase trade and investment, and to support competitiveness and inclusive growth. And now let me turn to the second big block of my presentation, the enlargement policy framework. For the countries of the Western Balkans aspiring to become members of the European Union, the Stabilization and Association process was established back in 1999. It has three aims, namely, first, of course, the stabilization and the swift transition to a market economy. The second, the promotion of regional cooperation. And the third, the prospect of EU membership. It helps the countries of the region and the whole region as such to build capacities to adapt and implement European rules and standards. This process was strengthened back in Thessaloniki by our leaders, the Thessaloniki European Council, in 2003, which has confirmed the future of the region as being part of the European Union. Since then, the European perspective of the region has helped the Western Balkan countries to make important progress on overall political and economic reforms with improved democratic processes. Visa liberalization and much improved regional cooperation are also fostering more successful societies. This firm, merit-based prospect of EU membership for the Western Balkans is a geostrategic investment for a stable, strong, and prosperous Europe and Western Balkans, something we have not seen before. It is a powerful tool to promote democracy, the rule of law, and the respect for fundamental rights, as it is bringing forward the need for essential reconciliation and stability in the region. For the accession process to regain credibility on both sides and to deliver its full potential, it needs to rest on solid trust, mutual confidence, and clear commitments on both sides. That is why last year we have proposed a revised enlargement methodology based on 4 principles: credibility, predictability, dynamism, and political steer. Last year in October, we also adopted a 28 billion euros economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans that demonstrates our ambition to support our partners and accompany them in the economic recovery from the COVID crisis. We trust that this additional injection of resources from grants to loans will be crucial to boost the economic development and the long-term economic recovery of the region, which will support the connectivity in transport and energy, kickstart green and digital transition, foster regional integration and convergence with the European Union. It is also there to change the landscape of the region in the next 4 to 5 years, by which we want to help to connect all capitals with highways and railways and broadband internet connections. We want to help the region to phase out coal as an energy source completely and thereby reduce its carbon footprint and emissions at least by 60%, and to bring the right skills for the youth of that region so that they can work for their own countries, for their own economies, bringing them much faster, much closer to the EU. Now let's talk about the individual countries of this region. Albania. Over the past years, progress were made in reforms, in particular on the rule of law and electoral reforms. And despite the challenges of the pandemic and the devastating earthquake, we have seen an acceleration in the work on the reforms. Our assessment is that the country has fulfilled all the conditions for holding the first intergovernmental conference of EU accession negotiations. North Macedonia has also maintained a steady pace in the implementation of our reforms, in particular in the areas of judiciary, fight against corruption and organized crime. The Council agreed unanimously last year, together with Albania, that North Macedonia is ready to have the first IGCs with, and I do hope that it will actually take place still under this presidency, the Portuguese presidency. As for Bosnia and Herzegovina, 25 years after the Dayton peace agreements, it is clear that the time has come to move on. This year provides a chance for reforms to address the 14 key priorities laid down in the Commission's opinion. First of all, the discussion should start on electoral and constitutional reforms to comply with EU standards and the European Court of Human Rights rulings. Secondly, judicial reforms are also crucial to restore the trust of citizens in the judiciary as an urgent priority. We will continue to support these efforts. We are committed also to move accession negotiations forward with Montenegro and Serbia on the basis of solid progress on the EU reform agenda. We are pleased that both countries have accepted the revised methodology, and discussions are being finalized with the member states on how it can be applied to these two countries. We are looking forward to the next intergovernmental conferences with Montenegro and Serbia, being organized still during the Portuguese presidency. In Montenegro, the next milestone in the EU negotiations is meeting the rule of law interim benchmarks in key critical areas such as media freedom, fight against corruption and organized crime, without opening new issues in the judicial reform agenda. Serbia needs to keep on delivering tangible and substantive progress to move forward with its EU accession negotiations. Serbia has taken very important steps on the independence of the judiciary and the prosecution, the fight against corruption and organized crime, and media freedom, and we need to see this continued. On that basis, new negotiating clusters shall be opened as soon as possible, still under the Portuguese presidency. And finally, in Kosovo, the political context has remained volatile in recent years, with frequent changes in governments and elections. Following the latest elections in February, the new government can rely on a strong parliamentary majority finally. Our message to Kosovo leadership is that they now have the opportunity to firmly take forward the EU-related reforms, as well as the EU-facilitated dialogue based on existing achievements. Last but not least, let's turn to Turkey. The Council conclusions of 2018 and 2019 on the standstill in the accession negotiations with Turkey remain valid. However, the EU has a strategic interest in the development of cooperative and mutually beneficial relations with Turkey. EU leaders in March welcomed the recent de-escalation in the Eastern Mediterranean, the resumption of bilateral talks between Greece and Turkey, and the forthcoming talks on the Cyprus problem in Geneva, taking place yesterday and today, and hopefully will bring results. Provided that the current de-escalation is sustained and that Turkey engages constructively, our leaders reaffirmed our readiness to engage with Turkey in a phased, proportionate, and reversible manner to enhance cooperation in a number of areas of common interest. And the European Council, as you might know, will revert to this issue in June this year. Let me conclude with a couple of remarks. Over the past year, we have been breathing new life into the policy frameworks to make robust and capable these policies to meet the new challenges. We have adopted new policy objectives and approaches for the Western Balkans, the Eastern Partnership, and the Southern Neighborhood. We have presented investment plans for the Western Balkans and the Southern Neighborhood, and we're working on one for the Eastern Partnership countries. All of this has been happening against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has affected the EU and its immediate neighborhood alike. We have proposed strong and coordinated response to the health crisis, as well as support to address the unprecedented challenge in all enlargement and neighborhood countries. All of this work will continue, with our enlargement and neighborhood policies at the heart of the Commission priorities and our work as a geopolitical actor, as we continue to work in partnership and solidarity with our immediate neighbors and with our member states. Thank you very much for your attention.
Mr. Farhali, thank you very much for your interesting speech, full of so important content, and especially for so kind words about our school. And now it's time for questions, both from the floor and YouTube chat. Please sit down, take this, please. It's time for our students.
Dear Commissioner, I have a question about post-pandemic time. It is obvious that in the future, the European Union will deal with the issues of post-pandemic problems, and does it mean that all acceding countries should expect the postpone in the negotiations? Thank you.
Well, I cannot tell you how the post-pandemic world will look like. What we know of it is that the economic challenge is tremendous, be it the Balkans, be it the Southern Neighborhood, or the East. And this is why we have been mobilizing all our efforts already to bring our contribution to the economic recovery. But this also creates an opportunity for us, meaning that we can now refocus our attention on the most important bottlenecks. Most important bottlenecks also in the eyes of the people of these regions, meaning facilitating trade routes with Europe, meaning facilitating the work of the local economies, meaning the facilitating of creating an investors climate around Europe, so that when our companies are considering cutting shorter their value chains after the COVID crisis, they have a unique opportunity in our neighborhood to invest and to come closer to Europe.
Mr. Commissioner, so I believe the next few years the European Union will face the recovery after the crisis of pandemic, especially for the South countries. So in your opinion, what is the perspective of any new country joining the EU? Is it going to be like 5, 10 or 15 years? And if the answer is yes, which country is the closest one to join the European Union? I mean, as for now, for today, of course, because as we know, it can change.
Well, this is a tricky question for any commissioner. First of all, my mandate lasts only for 5 years. So I'm responsible for this 5 years. And you might recall that at the very beginning, I made a personal pledge which of course bounds myself only, and it is completely dependent on the progress made in the different countries. And that is to have at least one of the negotiating countries ready to join the European Union by the end of this Commission, by the end of the term of this Commission. And this is what we are working for. Of course, the pandemic didn't help in that sense, but you may have heard from the presentation that we have tried to make the best use of the time still. And I'm still working for the exact same objective, to have at least one country ready to join by the end of this term.
Mr. Commissioner, I would like to ask, I would like to refer to the very beginning of your speech, and then you mentioned the Copenhagen criteria that certain aspiring countries need to meet. And I was just wondering which requirement or prerequisite is the most challenging one for the countries that are aspiring to join the European Union in the foreseeable future? Is it like democratization of public institutions or more this economic approach? Köszönöm.
I would say that it is all of it that is challenging. And if you look at, let's start with the economy and let's start with the sectorial policies. What you see is that there's still a considerable gap in terms of economic and social development between the European Union and the Western Balkan countries. What you also see is that in the Copenhagen criteria, it is made very clear that these countries would have to be capable of resisting the pressures of the internal market, the competitive pressures of the internal market, which means, in short, that they have to be not only competitive, but developed enough to be able to participate in the competition within the internal market. We are far from there, and this is why the economic and investment plan is going to be crucial. Not only when it comes to basic infrastructure, but also when it comes to bringing innovation to the region, when it comes to having the right workforce with the right skills and available in the region, and also the social development of the region. So this is a complex exercise already in the economy. And then I could turn to maybe to the most difficult part in terms of investments and challenges, and that is the environment, where very difficult tasks are ahead. Having said that, I have to underline also that we face equal challenges when it comes to the rule of law reforms, when it comes to the reform of the judiciary, when it comes to the fight against corruption, organized crime. There's still a lot to be done. But we are here to help. And we are here to help not only with words and knowledge transfer, but with deeds, with people on the ground, with financial support. And it is dependent only on the willingness and the uptake of the Western Balkan countries, how far they can go and how fast they can go.
Good afternoon, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you for your speech. I've learned a lot, so thank you. If that's all right, I would actually want to ask a more of a personal question, because from what I know, you have a legal background, and myself and some of my colleagues, we also have graduated law, and I was wondering if you could tell us in some short words, how has that background helped you or somehow shaped your way in politics, in administration? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this is really a personal question. Yes, at some point in my life I was a lawyer. That's how I see it now. And I was a very proud lawyer, I have to tell you. And I couldn't have imagined that I would be anything else than a lawyer. But the legal profession is one of those professions, there are not that many, that gives you a huge spectrum of activities where you can find your interest. And this is what I have learned throughout my career. I started as part of the first generation, or the young generation, of the 90s, who have started to work on EU accession as such. I was a student in Szeged from the regions, so not really from the capital. And my first contact with EU affairs has been the fortune that I have managed to get a scholarship to get a master in European studies. And this is where I have started to learn the whole trade of all this. But it came bit by bit, and it evolved. But given that this is a community of law, lawyers are always best positioned to, I wouldn't say run it, but I would say to be important contributors.
Good afternoon, Mr. Commissioner. I would like to ask you about the situation in Ukraine and in general, any possibility of joining of Ukraine in the future. As we know, the conflict in Donbass is really tense. Russia is escalating the conflict. So could you tell me if there is any chance that even if Ukraine fulfills all the European Union requirements, will join the EU when the conflict is not ended? Thank you.
It's a difficult question. You have seen the turmoil created by the signature of the DCFTA with Ukraine, not only in Ukraine. This is not my point. My point is the impact it had in our member states and the debate around it. Because the agreement itself does not set the objective of Ukraine becoming a member. However, it was understood in at least one country where referendum had to be held in a member state as a possibility to create the European perspective for Ukraine. And the referendum failed. And we all know what the political backlash has been. So when talking about European perspective for Ukraine, we have to be very vigilant that if it comes at the right moment, when there is openness also on the side of our member states. And this is why we think that this political reception or political climate, if you will, on the side of the European member states can only be created if the current agreements with Ukraine are fully implemented and that the reforms are going ahead. So, corruption, organized crime, judicial reforms are the testing grounds for Ukraine to convince our member states that by creating a European perspective, Europe is not creating risks for itself.
Mr. Commissioner, my question refers to the enlargement policy and the Brexit. How did the Brexit influence other countries, especially the candidates, to join the EU? Did the candidates change their attitude to acceding the EU? Thank you.
No, they haven't. I don't think it had an impact. It had an impact in the sense that we have seen something that no one has imagined was possible, that a member state leaves this community. However, I think that for the European project, it would be now important to welcome new members, to show that this project is not only alive and kicking, but it continues to develop along the basic objectives for which it was created, which is a peace project, which is creating a whole continent which is united. And this is why enlargement policy is a big responsibility nowadays to accelerate this process. And this Commission takes it very seriously, and this Commission invests enormously its political capital to show also to the neighborhood that we mean business.
Mr. Commissioner, I want to ask a question regarding to the first country you mentioned, Armenia. What are the newest ideas behind the cooperation with Armenia in face of the fact that Armenia is right now the member of Eurasian Union? Thank you.
Yes, this is a headache we are facing for quite some time. In Armenia, we will have elections now, also in relation to the devastating effect of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And I do hope that with the new government we can sit down and create a common plan on how to evolve our relations. Being a member of the Eurasian community, of course, creates certain limitations on our side, although I'm convinced that with Armenia we should aim for much more, and especially in the economy, this could be mutually interesting for both of us, and we will have to find a solution around this issue that you pointed to, but I don't think it should be it should be an objective that prevents us from at least considering options, how to deal with it.
And probably the last question from the chat. Can so-called vaccine diplomacy of Russia and China, but also possibly EU, became a significant factor in the Balkans and Eastern Europe? How do you think?
Well, yes, we see that vaccines are used not only to cure people or prevent diseases, but also to create opportunities. Let's not hide it. And we have a responsibility as Europeans for our neighborhood. And this is why I have been very strongly committed and have been investing personally a lot to be able to bring the vaccines to the Western Balkans. Only little knowledge is there out, and maybe I want to emphasize it for you, that Europe is already delivering vaccines through the COVAX initiative to the Balkans and to the East. We know that the quantities are not enough. However, we are also facing the bottleneck of the capacities of the pharmaceutical manufacturers. We do hope that quantities will now be much higher in this quarter than in the previous one. And this is why we have put on the table an additional amount of vaccines for the Western Balkans. And as I told you, I came to Warsaw to have a similar arrangement for the East. I have a good feeling. I have been part of very promising discussions today, but I don't want to reveal more than this. I do hope that we can very quickly repeat what we have been doing in the Balkans with our Eastern partners.
Okay. Any more questions? If not, I think the time in our agenda is over, and the multitude of topics discussed today doesn't allow for a simple summary, but I would like to share with you all, especially with you, first of all, of this remark. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic poses new challenges also in terms of the neighborhood policy, but I think that it's really important to continue to build the enlargement policy founded on solidarity. Solidarity to bring closer all European countries, European nations to united Europe. Thank you very much for your speech and for your lecture.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for your attention. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.